When Etten Patz disappeared on his way to school, his family were unaware of what had happened to him until after school hours were over and he never returned home. The search for Etten Patz began and parents around New York became alarmed in such a way that they started changing the way many of them watched over their children. Now, almost 40 decades later, a man has been identified as the perpetrator. Ethan Khalil Patz was born on October 9, 1972 to Julian Stanley Patz in Manhattan, New York. He was the middle child. He had an elder sister and a younger brother. At the time of Etten's disappearance, he and his family lived in the Soho neighborhood of Lower Manhattan. Soho is an acronym for South of Houston Street, a name that was first used by renowned developer Chester Rapkin in 1962. Today, South of Houston Street is famous for its boutiques, art galleries, and loft living spaces. Famous celebrities like Dakota Fanning, Alicia Keys, Daniel Craig, John Legend, Justin Timberlake, and Samuel L. Jackson are known to reside or have resided there. The neighborhood might be safe for habitation now, but it wasn't always like that in the 1970s. It was much rougher. The overall appearance of New York City was substantially different back then than it is today. The city had been tainted by a financial crisis from which many believed it would never fully recover. There were high unemployment rates, a significant flight to the suburbs, and attacks on the subway. Times Square was known for its prostitutes and pimps, and Central Park was feared for robbery and rape. Abandoned buildings were occupied by drug dealers and the homeless. Tourists were not left out of attacks and robbery back then. The Council of Public Safety, decomposed of police, firefighters, and other unions, published a pamphlet titled Welcome to Fear City with a large skull on the cover. The pamphlet advised tourists not to go outside after 6 o'clock, not go out of Midtown. They must make a taxi call before leaving their hotels. They should never take a subway ride, and they should leave no belongings in the hotel safe. At the time, when a visitor or tourist come to New York and see such pamphlet, they would undoubtedly turn around and leave. Consider what Etten Patz neighborhood may have looked like then. Boarded up buildings, shadowy alleys, no security cameras, and no cell phones. The morning of May 25, 1979, which appeared to have been a Friday, the final day of school before the Memorial Day holiday, was a chaotic one in the Patz household. Julie Patz, Etten's mother, who operated a daycare in their home, had her hands full that morning. She had two 2-year-olds to care for, her younger son and another kid who had spent the night. Also, Etten's older sister had resisted getting out of bed. Etten, on the other hand, woke up with a positive energy and was eager to start his day. According to Julie Patz, Etten had been attempting to be more independent, and in the midst of the chaos that morning, he saw an opportunity. He told his mom to allow him walk to school by himself. His mom recalled he pleaded, saying, "It's fine, Mom, I can do it." With some hesitation, Julie accepted. He then crammed his favorite toy cars into his tote bag, which was given to him by a friend's mother. Before leaving home, Etten donned his favorite headgear, an Eastern Airlines cap, after which his mother led him outside. He reportedly left with a $1 note in hand because he intended to get a soda on the way to school. It was the last time Julie, his mother, saw him. When Etten didn't return home that afternoon, she called around and discovered he hadn't made it to his bus or school. Julie claimed that she was shocked when she learned that Etten was missing. The Patz family house had been transformed into a command post where the press, volunteers, and police investigators had gathered. Etten's photograph was extensively publicized, appearing on television newscasts and the front pages of the city's newspapers. The city was covered in missing posters that featured an image of his hair poking out from under a cap. He was reportedly the first missing kid to appear on a milk container. The way he vanished, the ensuing search, and the anxiety it caused engulfed Lower Manhattan. Residents recalled police officers going from door to door, showing his photos and questioning people about where he could possibly be. Etten's disappearance caused a huge stir even outside his neighborhood. President Ronald Reagan declared May 25th, the day of his disappearance, to be National Missing Children's Day, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was founded in 1984, in part as a result of his disappearance. His case received a lot of attention, but there were no solutions. Numerous theories were put up, and a number of suspects came to light, including Jose Ramos, a man who had been convicted of abusing children and who the police had been hunting for years. Jose Ramos was romantically involved with a woman who had once been hired to accompany Etten home from school. As time went on, investigation refocused interest. Officials had searched the basement of a Lower Manhattan building for 8 hours in the year 2000. That building was where Ramos had previously resided. Investigators discovered pieces of bones, but it turned out that they belonged to animals. In the year 2012, after authorities discovered that a man by the name of Othniel Miller had laid a concrete floor soon after Etten vanished. They launched a search and dug up his workshop. Othniel Miller was a handyman who reportedly knew Eaton Patz. Eaton often visited him at his workshop. In fact, the $1 note that Eaton carried the morning he was last seen was given to him by Othniel Miller. However, the search, which sparked a fresh round of news media attention, failed to find Eaton's remains. But after a few weeks passed, a guy from New Jersey named Josie Lopez got in touch with the authorities and said that he thought his brother-in-law, Pedro Hernandez, might have something to do with Etten Patz abduction. Back then, on May 25, 1979, Pedro Hernandez was an 18-year-old high school dropout who had recently relocated to Manhattan from Camden, New Jersey. He worked as a stock clerk in a bodega near Etten Patz bus stop on West Broadway and Prince Street. Shortly after Etten vanished, perhaps within days, Pedro Hernandez went back to New Jersey and took a job in a clothing factory there. Not long after, he suddenly began telling people that he had killed a child in New York City. At a spiritual retreat, he confided in an elder from his church group and confessed before a prayer group, breaking down in tears. He also confessed to his previous wife before they got married. However, their testimony indicated that the accounts varied. Pedro Hernandez's childhood friend thought he had killed a black child. His former wife, after hearing Muchacho, thought he had killed a teenage boy. Investigators questioned Pedro Hernandez after his brother-in-law dialed 911. The police claimed that after spending many hours with the detectives, Pedro gave in. He claimed that he had asked Etten Patz if he wanted a soda in order to entice him down the bodega's basement. The little boy, who initially intended to buy a soda with his $1 bill, innocently followed him and was immediately attacked. In a segment of the interview that was captured on camera, Pedro Hernandez said to the detectives, "I grabbed him by the neck and I started to choke him." He refrained from claiming that he had killed Etten, explaining that the little boy was still alive when he had placed him in a plastic bag and then placed the bag inside of a box, which he then discarded about a block away. Pedro Hernandez's words have served as the foundation of the prosecution's case against him. Prosecutors have had little to work with in the absence of Etten's remains or any crime scene from which they could gather evidence. In addition to presenting the testimony of the investigators and the people he had confessed to decades before, they also played video recordings of the interviews Pedro Hernandez made to the police shortly before his arrest. The main focus of Pedro Hernandez's defense has been to cast doubt on his credibility. His attorneys contend that 56-year-old Pedro Hernandez has low intelligence, as well as a personality condition that impairs his ability to discriminate between truth and fiction. Therefore, they claim just because he admitted to what he thought he had done does not indicate he actually did it. Becky Hernandez, Pedro Hernandez's youngest child, testified about her father's strange conduct, including his claims of seeing angels and devils, watering a dead tree limb to make it grow, and how she would catch him talking to himself. The defense, however, claimed that the initial suspect, Jose Ramos, the child molester who had been found guilty, had the chance and the incentive to have been accountable for Etten Patz's disappearance. Members of the jury were in doubts after hearing their arguments. There was a deadlocked jury after 18 days of deliberations. In 2015, the judge declared a mistrial. Only one member of the panel who didn't think Pedro Hernandez was guilty held out. However, following a 4-month trial on February 14, 2017, Pedro Hernandez was found guilty of murder and kidnapping. He was then sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Why do you think Pedro Hernandez committed such evil atrocity? Was he truly possessed by a demon? Unknown circumstances led to the untimely death of Sylvia Quayle on August 4, 1981. Sylvia Quayle, a devoted sister and daughter, was discovered dead in her Cherry Hills Village apartment at the age of 34, with a white towel covering her face. The murderer evaded authorities for years, and even after a thorough investigation, it appeared that the case would never be resolved. Her brutal murder remained one of Colorado's most puzzling cold cases for more than 40 years. What possible reason could there be for this horrible deed? How was the case ultimately resolved by the investigators? Cherry Hills Village, a wealthy municipality in Arapahoe County, Colorado, is the setting for today's case. With a population of about 6,500, it is well known for its most expansive estates, opulent residences, and stunning natural surroundings. With its top-notch parks, schools, and recreational opportunities, the city offers its citizens a high quality of life and a strong sense of community. The Cherry Hills Country Club, which has played host to numerous important golf tournaments over the years, is also located there. This tranquil municipality is the site of a horrifying incident that happened in 1981. On September 23, 1946, Sylvia Quayle, the eldest child of William and Mary Quayle, was born in Cherry Hills Village. Sylvia had a wonderful spirit from an early age and a contagious laugh that could make anyone's day. Everyone in her community admired her lively and amiable personality. She was always willing to help those in need and had a heart of gold. Sylvia had an unwavering love for Jo Quayle, her younger sister. She was very loving and caring toward her younger sister, who she cherished. In her community, Sylvia was well known for her generosity and kindness. She was also highly respected by everyone who knew her for her unselfish willingness to help others without hesitation. Sylvia Quayle was a multi-talented woman whose ambition and optimism were apparent in every facet of her life. After graduating from Englewood High School in 1964, Sylvia decided to pursue a career in architecture and history due to her strong interest in both subjects. Sylvia's love of architecture was ingrained in her, and she counted herself lucky to have an uncle named Wesley Quayle, who was a well-known architect in the area. In an attempt to find ideas for her own projects, Sylvia would frequently spend hours poring over her uncle's numerous blueprints and designs. Sylvia was not scared to follow her dreams and passions, in spite of the social morals of the time. She paved the way for women to pursue careers in architecture by demonstrating that anything is achievable with perseverance and hard effort. Sylvia Quayle left a lasting impression on everyone she met thanks to her upbeat outlook, generosity, and unrestrained ambition. Her legacy continues to encourage young women to follow their passions and aspirations despite any obstacles they may encounter. With her diverse talents and passions, which she pursued with zeal and tenacity, Sylvia was a real multifaceted gem. Her hobbies demonstrated her love of creativity, particularly her amazing pottery work that astounded everyone. Her distinctive and endearing pottery creations were much loved by her friends and family, and receiving one as a gift was always a delight. However, she did not take cooking lightly, and it had a special place in her heart among all her hobbies. She even made the decision to launch her own wedding cake company, dubbed the Buttery, out of her passion. This was a huge hit with her clients. Everyone was left wanting more after tasting her exquisite and expertly made cakes. Sylvia was fiercely independent, but she never lost sight of the value of family. She was very close to both her parents and Jo, her younger sister. She had a loving family, and it showed in the way she treated everyone around her. Her contagious positivity and kind nature were a reflection of that. Sylvia Quayle and her parents had an unbreakable bond. Situated in the 3800 block of South Arden Street, just a short distance from their daughter's residence, William and Mary Quayle would start their day with a cozy cup of coffee and attend a discussion with their eldest child. The most important people in Sylvia's life were her parents, and her disposition improved the day routine for her family. They had no idea what horror was in store for them. The Quayle family was unaware that August 3, 1981 would be remembered as a tragic day for all time. Sylvia promised to come back the following morning as they enjoyed their morning coffee together. Unbeknownst to everyone, Sylvia departed for work as usual, but this would be the last time they would ever see her. When Sylvia talked to her sister on the phone that evening, they joked and laughed as usual without realizing it would be their last exchange. On August 4th, the following morning, Sylvia did not arrive at her parents' house for their customary coffee in the morning. Knowing that Sylvia would never skip their daily ritual without telling them caused her parents to become concerned. When they tried to call her landline, nobody picked up. Now, even more worried, Sylvia's father William raced to her house, which was only 150 feet away. William's heart raced with fear. As he got closer to her house, he had a strong suspicion that something was seriously off. Sadly, his worst nightmares came true when he got there. The Quayle family would always remember that day. William arrived home to find the house filled with an unsettling quiet. He was startled to see that the wooden entrance and security screen were both flume wide open, inviting him inside as he drew closer to the front door. Fear descended upon him like a thick shroud as he cautiously entered the living room, and he saw Sylvia lying on the ground, motionless. With her body twisted into an unusual pose, her arms lifted above her head, seemingly in a last-ditch request for assistance. William would never be able to forget the horrific scene that he saw. His hand trembled as he reached out to remove the white towel from Sylvia's face, hiding the most exposed part of her body. Though at the time it seemed like the only thing he could do, it was a modest act of respect for the daughter who meant the world to him. Officers Gerald Marks and Jack DeVole of the Cherry Hills Village Police Department responded to 3800 South Ogden Street right away when William, who was shaking, dialed 911 for assistance at around 7:57 in the morning. What they discovered was a horrifying and gory scene. Surgeon Richard Crowles and Detective Harry Whitman also showed up to support the investigation. Even the most seasoned police officers would have shuddered in horror at the crime scene. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation was called in to help with the investigation and processing of the crime scene, because the police department realized they needed all the assistance they could get to solve this horrible crime. Experienced CBI agents like Watson, Wayne Bryant, and Howard Gillespie were present, giving some hope that the person responsible for this horrific crime would be apprehended and prosecuted. Seeing the crime scene was unsettling. Their gazes swept over the entire space when the detective entered. It was clear right away how the offender had entered the house through the wide-open front door and the security screen door. There were obvious blood stains on the floor, and the living room was in a messy state. Certain spots, such as the vicinity of the front door and a short distance from Sylvia's lifeless body, appear to have a concentration of blood. The investigators saw a medium-sized kitchen knife with a blood-stained silver blade lying next to the body as they got closer to the body. Surprisingly, they also discovered a white glow-style shirt, possibly placed there by the murderer, lying over the knife's handle. It looked like a scene from a horror film, and the detectives knew they would have a challenging task ahead of them in trying to solve this horrible crime. Detective Whitman felt a shiver run down his spine as he looked around the scene. It was enough to make his stomach turn to see Sylvie's lifeless body lying on the ground with her red shirt pulled over her face. But what really got his attention were the marks that were clearly visible on her body. Her bloodied hands gave the impression that she had battled for her life, and her broken fingernails were a visible reminder of the hardship she must have endured. He looked at her neck. The marks there looked like fingers, suggesting that she had been strangled. There was a mystery to be solved regarding the red marks on her inner thighs. The detective's attention was drawn to the blood-stained pillow in the bedroom. The quantity of blood on it was a good indicator of how serious the attack was. Looking around, he saw that Sylvia had no chance of getting help because the telephone cord was severed. It was clear that the murderer had carefully thought out the attack and ensured Sylvia was alone and defenseless. A feeling of dread overcame Detective Whitman as he looked through the scene again. This was no typical crime. Rather, it was a horrifying act that required quick attention to solve. The odd condition of the outside phone line leading to the victim's home caught Detective Whitman's attention as he inspected the outside of the house. It was taken with reckless abandon and slum across the hood of Sylvia's 1974 brown Corvette, looking more like a macabre ornament. The culprit behind the sabotage, according to the investigation, was a garden hose that was hurled over the line and mercilessly pulled down, leaving behind telltale black marks. It was evident that the offender did not hesitate to use homemade instruments for their evil purposes. There was also proof that the attacker had made several attempts to break in. Investigators discovered a tiny puncture in a bedroom window screen, indicating a botched attempt. But the bathroom window was not so fortunate. The screen vanished and was subsequently discovered 50 feet from the house, concealed among some tall weeds. The wooden frame was found to have been left unlocked, making it an easy target for the intruder. It also had a prime mark on the bottom, indicating that it had been tampered with. Sylvie Quayle's brutal murder left a horrifying trail of evidence, and her body was sent for an autopsy after the crime scene was examined. The startling truth about Sylvie's death came to light following the autopsy performed by Arapahoe County Coroner John Wood. Sylvia had been struck by a .22 caliber bullet to the head. She was stabbed 3 times in the upper back, strangled, and most likely assaulted. Dr. Wood, an experienced coroner, swabbed various parts of Sylvia's body to preserve any potential forensic evidence, including microscopic slides made from the swabs taken from inside her body. According to Dr. Wood's report, Sylvia died from exsanguination brought on by multiple posterior chest stab wounds that lacerated the altar and both lungs. He also found that Sylvia had a gunshot wound to the head and extracted 2 bullet fragments from her brain. The horrific nature of her last moments was revealed in the autopsy report that followed. Her life was taken by a gunshot wound, several stab wounds, strangulation, and possibly an assault. There is no doubt that Sylvia's death was the consequence of an incredibly violent act carried out by an unidentified attacker. Dr. Wood reported that the death was a homicide, so law enforcement will have their hands full trying to find the person responsible and bring them to justice. With a ton of forensic evidence left behind, the case had all the makings of a classic coujonet, giving investigators hope that they would soon find the culprit. However, it became more and more obvious that this was no typical investigation as the days stretched into weeks and then months. Even with their greatest efforts, the local police force was having trouble moving forward. The lack of technology and tangible leads make it difficult to follow even the smallest pieces of evidence. With DNA technology still in its infancy in the early 1980s, the identity of the bodily fluid discovered at the scene remained little more than a mystery. Investigators were left scratching their heads, wondering how they were ever going to break through in this seemingly unsolvable case, without a registered sex offender profile to work from. Detectives meticulously examined the murder scene of Sylvia Quayle and gathered about 140 pieces of evidence. Not until 2 years following the murder was a noteworthy discovery made. A different light source was employed by forensic experts in 1983 to identify any possible foreign objects on the orange area rock that had been gathered from the spot where Sylvia Quayle had died. Subsequent examination revealed the substance to be male DNA. This finding offered investigators a new avenue to pursue in their pursuit of justice, as well as an essential piece of evidence for the investigation. For years, there had been little to no advancement in the murder of Sylvia, with the case languishing in the archives. However, a ray of hope appeared on the horizon for the investigators in 1985 when Otis L. Waddell, a notorious drifter and serial killer, confessed to her murder. He gave the detective a detailed account of the trees and hedges surrounding her house, giving rise to the prospect that justice would eventually be done. However, doubts arose about Toole's confessions and those of his companion, Henry Lee Lucas. Authorities were only able to confirm a small number of the hundreds of murders that Lucas, who passed away in a Texas prison in 2001, claimed to have committed. The kidnapping and murder of Adam Walsh, the son of America's most wanted broadcaster, John Walsh, in Hollywood, Florida, was among the most notorious crimes that Toole admitted to. Years after Toole's confession to Adam's murder was later retracted, Hollywood police officials said they had closed the case because they were certain Toole was the murderer. After he made this confession, investigators thought he might have killed Sylvia. But the Arapahoe County District Attorney, Bob Gallagher, dropped the charges against Toole in 1993. This resulted from DNA testing on the evidence, which demonstrated that Toole was not the source of the DNA discovered 12 years earlier at the crime scene. It appeared as though a sudden gust of wind carried it away, the meager thread of hope that had sustained the Quayle family and the detectives. The case reverted to its initial state. A portion of the carpet that was kept for additional testing turned out to be very important evidence in 1995. 5 years later, in 2000, the results of the testing conducted on the sample by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation revealed an unidentified male DNA profile. As investigators entered the profile into Cody's, the FBI's combined DNA index system excitement mounted. Unfortunately, no match was discovered. For many years, the law enforcement agencies struggled to find answers in the murder of Sylvia Quayle. Even after the most recent technologies were used in the investigation and every lead was investigated with the utmost care, the case remained unsolved. Sylvia's family was waiting impatiently for any information regarding the case. Despite their best efforts, the murder of Sylvia remained a mystery for many years, leaving the family grieving and many questions unanswered. There was an advancement in Sylvia Quayle's case following years of quiet. In 2019, Metro Denver Crime Stoppers partnered with United Data Connect, a genetic genealogy-focused company founded by former Denver District Attorney Mitch Morrissey. They employed a technique that had previously assisted in the resolution of several unsolved cold cases around the nation. The infamous Golden State Killer in California was identified thanks to this creative technique. Crime Stoppers received a renewed interest in the case in January 2020 from Cherry Hills Village cold case detectives and investigator Matt Hannigan of the 18th Judicial District Attorney's Office. After 4 months of hard work, on May 26, 2020, the company's technicians had a name, David Dwayne Anderson. This was because technological advancements made it possible to further the investigation using cutting-edge familial DNA investigations. After all these years, the revelation of Anderson's identity had given Sylvia's case a glimmer of hope for justice. Koza, Nebraska is a sleepy town, and its residents had no idea that one of them was involved in a violent 1981 murder case. The 61-year-old David Dwayne Anderson had been living a peaceful, seemingly routine life in this tiny, mostly unpopulated town. However, very few people were aware that more than 30 years prior Anderson was residing in Englewood, only a few miles away, when the horrific murder of Sylvia Quayle rocked Cherry Hills Village to its foundations. As detectives dug further into David Dwayne Anderson's past, a pattern of illegal activity became apparent. In the years after Sylvia Quayle's murder, Anderson had committed at least 8 burglaries. In a few of these, he had worn gloves to hide his fingerprints. This disclosure has only strengthened the growing body of evidence against him. Anderson had even taken off a window screen in one break-in, mimicking the actions of Sylvia's killer to gain entry to the house. The evidence was starting to come together and Anderson's involvement in the crime appeared more plausible. If found guilty of the murder, Anderson would have received the same sentence that was in place when Sylvia was killed, a lifetime in prison with the possibility of release after 20 years. But first-degree murder convictions are currently unpardonable under state law. The argument against Anderson was growing stronger by the day and the stakes were very high. Robert Fuller, a United Data Connect investigator, went to Cozad on January 16, 2021 without his knowledge in order to collect his DNA. On January 18, 2021, after Anderson threw 2 trash bags into a nearby dumpster, Fuller a close eye on Anderson's movements from outside his apartment complex. The 15 bags held potential genetic material belonging to Anderson, which could give investigators the lead they need to crack the case of the long-running murder. It had worked out well for Detective Fuller's covert mission to obtain DNA evidence from David Dwayne Anderson. From Anderson's garbage bags, he had retrieved a few things, including an intriguing assortment of drinks. Among the items found were a can of vanilla Coke, an inexpensive water bottle, a bottle of spiced rum, and a bottle of Michelob Ultra beer. At a travel stop in Sterling, Colorado, Fuller met with an investigator and gave the evidence. Each item bagged separately for the CBI to examine further. On January 29, 2021, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation gave detectives their eagerly anticipated report following a week of investigation. According to the report, there was a match between the male DNA profile from the confiscated vanilla Coke can and the DNA found on several items gathered during Sylvia Quayle's homicide investigation. The DNA evidence was unquestionably convincing and established Anderson's link to the crime scene. Subsequent analysis of the gathered data revealed that DNA from Anderson was discovered on the crime scene rug and on swabs taken from Sylvia's corpse during her autopsy. Moreover, a swab taken from Sylvia's left breast contained Anderson's DNA as well. It was shocking to learn that Sylvia's blood and Anderson's biological fluid were mixed together in the white towel that had been found covering her face. This proved that Anderson was the one who had murdered Sylvia brutally. On February 10, 2021, in Nebraska, David Dwayne Anderson was apprehended for the murder of Sylvia Quayle after decades of hiding a deadly and sinister secret. He returned to Colorado voluntarily to answer to charges of first-degree felony murder and first-degree murder after deliberate thought. The case's prosecutors were committed to seeing Sylvia's rights upheld and making sure Anderson was made to answer for his deeds. District Attorney Grant Grosgerbauer, a deputy for the 18th Judicial District, said the defendant had a dark secret that was ultimately disclosed during the trial. After so many years, the truth would finally be revealed. Anderson, the person suspected of killing Sylvia Quayle over 40 years ago, has been found guilty following a protracted and difficult legal battle. 3 months after the trial ended in a hung jury on March 25, 2022, it was retried and on June 30th of that year, the verdict was rendered. On August 4, 2022, Anderson, who is currently 62 years old, was scheduled to be sentenced. The punishment he received would be determined by the legislation in force at the time of the murder and could include a life sentence with the possibility of release after 20 years. For the friends and family of Quayle, who have been waiting decades for justice to be done, this verdict represents the end of a torturous and protracted journey. Justice was at last served for Sylvia Quayle, who was brutally murdered in Cherry Hills Village, Colorado nearly 40 years ago. Mitch Morrissey, the creator of United Data Connect, expressed his condolences to the Quayle family, especially to her father who discovered a lifeless body. As a father of a young woman himself, the unsettling details of the crime left him in shock. Nevertheless, Sylvia's parents were not present to see their daughter's murderer apprehended. Mary Quayle died 10 years after her husband, William Quayle, in 1999. Their hearts were left with an enormous void that would never be filled after losing their daughter. Sylvia's vibrant personality and her unwavering love for those she held dear were always missed by her family and friends. It had been much anticipated that suspect David Dwayne Anderson would be arrested in Nebraska in February 2021. And the trial that followed was not without its difficulties. The 18th Judicial District prosecutors persevered and eventually won a guilty verdict for Anderson on both counts of first-degree murder after deliberation and felony murder, despite the first trial ending in a hung jury. Grant Grosgerbauer, the deputy district attorney, discussed the defendant's dark secret, which had been kept a secret for more than 40 years before the trial revealed it. Chris Gallo, the chief deputy district attorney, conveyed his appreciation to the detectives and forensic scientists who toiled diligently on the case, not allowing the passage of time to hinder their pursuit of justice. For Quayle's family, who had been waiting for justice for more than 40 years, the verdict provided some closure. John Kellner, the district attorney, emphasized the case's significance in demonstrating that justice can ultimately triumph even in the face of a lengthy delay. This decision serves as a warning to any murderer who believes they have gotten away with their crimes. Justice may take longer to arrive, but it will eventually do so. Justice has finally been served after more than 40 years, all thanks to the unwavering efforts of law enforcement and forensic specialists who are not willing to give up on this case. Though it is unable to bring back Sylvia and her infectious spirit, it serves as a warning to all killers that they cannot hide from justice and will always be held accountable for their horrific deeds. 61-year-old Carol and Reggie Sumner originally met in school, and the young pair shared a brief romance before breaking up after graduation. It wouldn't be until later in life they would reconnect, fall in love, and marry. After serving time in the Navy, Reggie got married and found work with the railroad. Carol also got married twice and had children of her own. But she had difficult marriages. The first ended in divorce and the second was extremely abusive. Carol filed a restraining order against her second husband, but one day he showed up at her house, pulled a gun on her, and shot her 6 times. Carol survived, but her husband was chased by police and cornered. He then pulled the trigger and shot himself. Rhonda, Carol's daughter, took care of her mother after the traumatizing ordeal. She was only 10 years old at the time, but as soon as she could, Carol got back into work, holding down multiple jobs to support her family. 40 years passed before Reggie and Carol met again. In 2000, Carol was working at a cable television company when a phone call came in. On the end of the line was none other than her high school sweetheart, Reggie. It was like nothing had changed, and the pair quickly became inseparable. A year later, they married in Carol's home. They soon made the move to Jacksonville, Florida. Reggie decided that moving there would be the best thing for his health. Carol agreed, and they began preparing for it. They sold their Chevrolet Lamina to Tiffany Cole, one of their neighbors. The Sumners were very close to Tiffany, having known her since she was a little girl, and they treated her as part of the family. When Tiffany's father became ill, the Sumners stepped in to help, and many said they supported Tiffany like she was their own granddaughter. Tiffany started making monthly payments to the Sumners for the car they had given to her. Once they moved, she would regularly drive to Florida to give them the money and spend some time with them. In early July 2005, Rhonda tried several times to get hold of her mother and stepfather, but her calls were going unanswered. It wasn't long before Rhonda decided she had to make the 4-hour journey to Jacksonville to find out what was wrong. They all spoke every day on the phone, and after almost a week with no contact, Rhonda knew this was troubling. When she reached the house, the couple were nowhere to be seen. On July 10th, Rhonda made the call to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Department to report the couple as missing. When law enforcement arrived, they noticed their car was gone and the front door was unlocked. Food was left on the stove, and plates and cutlery were left out too. It looked as if the couple had just picked up and left at a moment's notice. Carol's phone was still plugged in on charge, and her daily planner she never left without was on the table. The pair had also left their dog Mikey as well as all their medication. And Reggie weren't in good health, and departing without any of their medication was a huge cause for concern. Carol had been undergoing debilitating chemotherapy for liver cancer, which stemmed from hepatitis C, something she had contracted whilst undergoing a blood transfusion after being shot by her second husband. She also suffered from diabetes and osteoporosis. Reggie also suffered badly with diabetes and osteoporosis, and due to a break in one of his legs, was virtually confined to a wheelchair. The couple also weighed very little. Everyone was alarmed, and the media quickly ran with the story to get the word out there. Detectives immediately began an investigation, which started inside the house. Financial statements had been left out, and they contacted the banks to see if anything had been withdrawn. They put out a statewide alert for the couple's missing car, and wasn't long before they got a hit. Just 2 days later, machines. Security cameras had captured the people using the card, and the information garnered from the phone analysis told police exactly who to look at. The phone record showed that the number had been used to call a car rental company. The car that was rented matched the car that was seen on some of the CCTV at the ATM machines. The people posing as the missing couple on the phone were none other than Tiffany Cole, Carol and Reggie's old neighbor, and her boyfriend, Michael James Jackson. Through GPS and the rental of the Mazda, The police were directed to a motel in South Carolina. 2 rooms had been rented out under Tiffany's name, and there were 3 people there: Tiffany, Michael, and another man, 18-year-old Alan Lindell Wade. The trio were questioned straight away. Tiffany admitted to participating in a robbery at the Sumners' home, but she and Michael said they knew nothing about where the couple were. Tiffany then suddenly threw a 4th name into the mix: Bruce Kent Nixon. But how and why had this come to be? And where were Carol and Reggie Sumner? When police finally located Bruce Nixon, he told them a shocking and disturbing story. Karen and Reggie had said that Tiffany was always welcome in their home and told her their door was always open. 24-year-old Tiffany and her boyfriend of 2 months, Michael, who was 23, traveled to Jacksonville to visit their friend, Alan Lindell Wade. While they were there, the Summers happily agreed to give them a place to sleep. During Tiffany and Michael's stay, the Summers mentioned that they had recently closed the deal on their South Carolina property for just short of $100,000. This would set in motion a frightening and calculated scheme. Michael took note of all the couple's belongings and furnishings in their home and began plotting a sick and twisted robbery. Initially, Michael considered breaking into the home while the couple were out of town, but the plan then evolved to them robbing and then killing the couple. They first thought about injecting the pair with a lethal dose of medication. However, that idea was dismissed, and they agreed on what would be an unthinkable plan. A month before the Sumners went missing, Alan rented a car to drive to Jacksonville to visit his friend, 18-year-old Bruce Kent Nixon. He told Bruce he had plans to rob someone's house, but didn't give any more details. Bruce stole some shovels from around his neighborhood. They all drove across state lines into Georgia to a remote, wooded location and dug a hole, 6 foot deep and 4 foot wide. Alan and Bruce dug, assisted by Michael, while Tiffany held the flashlight. Purchases were also made for disposable gloves, plastic wraps, duct tape, and a fake gun. On July 8th at around 10 p.m., the group of 4 left in a rental car, a Mazda RX-8, and drove to the Sumners' home. Tiffany and Michael waited in the car while Alan and Bruce knocked on the door. Carol answered. The pair said they urgently needed to borrow a phone as they were having car trouble. Carol, wanting to help, let them in straight away. As soon as they entered, they aimed the fake gun at the couple. Carol and Reggie, dressed only in their pajamas, were completely terrified and weak due to their health problems. The Sumners cooperated fully, telling the men they could take whatever they wanted as long as they didn't hurt them. Despite this, Reggie and Carol were restrained with duct tape over their eyes, mouth, hands, and feet. Alan also disabled the telephone lines. While the couple were immobile, Alan and Bruce phoned Michael, who was waiting outside. Michael then entered the home and started searching for financial statements. He also took Reggie's prized coin collection. Both Bruce and Alan forced the Sumners into the trunk of their own Lincoln Town car. After this, Michael and Alan drove the Lincoln out to the woods, to the pre-dug hole. Bruce later said that when the trunk opened, the couple had managed to become free of the duct tape and were clutching each other tightly, holding hands and praying. Michael told Bruce to cover their eyes with the tape again, saying it was only a mind thing. He said he didn't want to see their eyes as he killed them. After forcing Carol and Reggie out of the car, they got the PIN to the couple's bank card. Carol then had her jewelry snatched off, before she and Reggie were shoved into the hole next to each other. Carol and Reggie Sumner were then buried alive. Tiffany and Bruce were waiting in the hired Mazda just up the road. The group then drove the Sumners' vehicle to Sanderson, Florida, where they set about removing the evidence and wiping down the inside of the Lincoln before dumping it. They later returned to the couple's home to steal a computer and some more jewelry before checking into a hotel. They spent the night in a limousine, taking pictures with the stolen goods, showing off the cash, and drinking bottles of champagne. Through tracking the group via cell phone data and CCTV, on July 14th, just 4 days after Rhonda had reported her mother and stepfather missing, police apprehended Alan, Tiffany, and Michael in a South Carolina hotel. Inside their rooms, they found Carol's car keys, a suitcase containing the financial documents, receipts for items that had been purchased using the couple's money, Reggie's driver's license, credit cards, and checkbooks. In Tiffany's car, detectives also found Reggie's coin collection. When Bruce Nixon was located just a day later, he admitted to everything and was more than willing to tell the detectives exactly what had happened and what each individual person's involvement had been. He also told the police he would take them to where the Sumners had been buried. An excavation was carried out and law enforcement found Carol and Reggie Sumner crouched under the dirt, holding each other. The medical examiner discovered that they had inhaled the dirt until they eventually died of mechanical asphyxiation. The earth they were buried under had compressed their lungs, smothering them. Bruce told the police that he had helped dig the hole, but only found out the following day that the plan was not only to rob the couple, but to bury them alive. Tiffany also claimed that she believed the hole was being dug to hide the stolen goods in. But Bruce said this was nonsense, and Tiffany knew exactly what was going to happen to Reggie and Carol. He said that she was the sole connection between everyone involved that night. She also told them all the couple's schedules, and she knew they would be home at that time after a long day at the doctor's. Bruce Nixon was arrested first. Tiffany Cole, Michael James Jackson, and Alan Lindell Wade were subsequently arrested too, and all four were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, armed kidnapping, and armed robbery. While in jail, Michael made a phone call to his grandmother. She read him a newspaper article about Bruce's cooperation with the police. This only added more to the already strong case against them. In court, Carol's daughter asked them not to sentence Alan to death. She also asked for leniency for Bruce, saying that both men had been manipulated by Michael. She said they were too young and were on drugs at the time of the murders. They were used in the worst way. Solving 2 deaths with more deaths does not make me happy. I know in my heart that my mom and Reggie would have felt the same way. Bruce pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and agreed to testify against the other 3. Following this, he was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Michael and Alan received the death penalty. Tiffany's trial took place in October 2007. During the trial, she stated that she had only agreed to the burglary and was totally unaware of the plot to kidnap and kill the couple. She testified that although she did help dig the hole in the ground, she had no idea what it would be used for. She claimed that even as they drove to the wooded area, she had no knowledge that the summoners were bound in the trunk of the Lincoln. Prosecutors weren't settling for this account. They protested that she was the sole link between the group and the only person that tied everything together was her. Tiffany didn't believe that she could be guilty of first-degree murder because she didn't personally kill the summoners. But under Florida law, someone who participates in a crime can be found equally culpable for a murder even if they didn't directly cause the death. Her defense attorney argued that Michael controlled and manipulated Tiffany during their short-lived relationship, and he was the real mastermind behind what had happened that night. The defense argued that her low intelligence level and mental health issues should also be taken into consideration. But despite hers and her defense's pleas of innocence, the jury took just 90 minutes to deliberate and they ultimately found her guilty. Their verdict was 9-3 for the death penalty. Tiffany is one of the youngest women on death row in the United States. One of the prosecutors on the case, Jay Plotkin, recalled, Tiffany later asked for in a letter she to them, that could be more heinous, atrocious, or cruel, or more painful and vile. Tiffany later asked the families for forgiveness in the letter she wrote to them. Some members of the family say they have forgiven her for their own sense of peace. Alan Wade later revealed to the media he had met a woman online named Sigrid, whom he married and had a child with. Sigrid had been writing to inmates on death row when she started talking to Alan, and this sparked a romantic relationship. Despite conjugal visits not being permitted at Union Correctional Institution where Alan is being held, Sigrid somehow managed to get pregnant. A 2016 U.S. Supreme Court ruling found that Florida's prior law permitting non-unanimous jury verdicts and death penalty cases actually violated the Sixth Amendment, prompting Florida to resentence more than 150 people. The state court said anyone sentenced after a 2002 ruling could now be eligible for a new hearing and possibly a new sentence. And because of this, in 2017, the Florida Supreme Court ordered a new sentence hearing for Tiffany Cole. Michael James Jackson was previously sentenced to death with an 8-4 majority ruling, and Alan Lindell Wade was sentenced with an 11-1 majority ruling. Neither had unanimous verdicts, so they will likely get new hearings as well. Some days when Rhonda's phone rings, she said she often forgets and for a second hopes her mother is on the line. Reggie and Carol Sumner had found happiness together after years apart and after so many years of pain and troubles in their own lives. They were a kind, generous, and loving couple. All they wanted to do was spend their later years together. Their caring and giving nature will always be remembered by their family. And Rhonda keeps Carol and Reggie's ashes in an urn at her home, so that the couple can stay together forever. Garland, Texas, November 2011. 54-year-old Kelly Martin and her husband Don, like many, were decorating the family home, ready for the festive period. Don was a police officer and Kelly a teacher. They had been together since college and had 2 daughters, Lauren and Caitlin. While grabbing boxes down from the attic, Kelly missed a step on the ladder, tripping and falling. She instantly felt a twinge in her back. The pain was bad, but she got through the holidays hoping it was just a pulled muscle or a trapped nerve, and that it would pass. But when it became obvious it was far more than this, she made a trip to her doctor. This small misstep on the ladder had resulted in a herniated disc in her back. Physical therapy, painkillers, muscle relaxers weren't enough. And eventually her doctor recommended a fantastic neurosurgeon new to the area, Dr. Christopher Dunch. Incredibly well respected, highly sought after and praised by many of the doctors, it was a no-brainer to pay him a visit. Dr. Dunch put Kelly at ease right away, saying it was no problem at all. A very routine surgery, likely no more than 45 minutes. In fact, it was about the simplest operation a neurosurgeon could perform, he said. Have you ever had any bad outcomes or deaths on your surgery? Kelly asked. He replied, no, knock on wood. And with this, her surgery was scheduled for March 2012. The day came around and Dawn waited patiently in the waiting area. But the 45 minutes drive Dunch said it would take would soon pass. Then it was an hour, then an hour and a half. It was almost at double the time now and Dawn was starting to get worried. He asked one of the nurses to go and check, and about 20 minutes later Drive Dunch came out. He said the surgery went well and Kelly was moving around but was in a lot of pain, so he got the medicine. He said she may have to go up to the ICU and stay overnight, but she was going to be okay. Dawn was told he couldn't go and see his wife as they were still working on her. A phrase that sent a shiver down his spine. Dawn said something in his gut was telling him it was all off. He called Lauren and Caitlin and said they should come up. 2 hours later, Dawn and his daughters were still waiting around and panicking. They suddenly saw the ICU physician, Dr. Dunch, and the anesthesiologist walking towards them. The looks on their faces told the story before they even opened their mouths. The words no one wanted to hear. We did everything we could. Kelly Martin had died. How had such a simple, routine operation gone so devastatingly wrong? Dawn said Dr. Dunch never said a word, not even looking at the three of them. They were told by the ICU physician that it had been a medical miscalculation. Records later showed that during the surgery her blood pressure had plummeted and she went a gray color. As she regained consciousness after the surgery, she began to hit her legs, which had turned an odd color with splotches on them. Kelly had become so agitated. The nurses had to sedate her. She never woke up. Dawn said it was pure misery. My world just ended right then and there. He started rocking back and forth so enraged with emotion he almost lunged at them. I knew something was wrong and I wanted to hurt him, he said of Dr. Dunch. Caitlin said it was like being in slow motion, and as they said their goodbyes to Kelly, Dawn asked for some scissors so he could keep a little piece of her hair. They all drove home in silence. The medical examiner confirmed that Kelly had bled to death internally, after one of her arteries was completely sliced. Dawn, Lauren and Caitlin all had a terrible feeling they weren't getting the full story. Something about Dunch was not sitting well with them and they wanted answers. But what had happened to Kelly Martin was sadly just the beginning, and soon a huge can of worms would start to open. But as always, sometimes you must go backwards slightly to move forwards. Born in 1971 in Montana, Christopher Daniel Dunch had originally set his sights on playing football. One of his teammates remembered him as not being very good at following orders and struggling with the most basic of drills, but someone that came back every practice trying to get it right. He made multiple transfers and moved around so much that he was told this had taken away his eligibility to play professionally. He realized his football dream was over and suddenly made a drastic change. He abruptly switched to a career in medicine. In 1995, he received his undergraduate degree from the University of Memphis before getting his MD there too. He excelled in medical school to such a point that he was allowed to join the Alpha Omega Medical Honor Society and started working with Russian scientists on research programs, gaining $3 million in funding. He started his surgical residency at the University of Tennessee and was soon running 2 labs. He was described as a charming, smooth-talking and witty guy with a glowing 12-page resume. He had many people speaking highly of him and seeking him out. But despite all of his successes and accolades, things were slowly starting to unravel, and it was becoming clear that all was not as it appeared. His resume boasted that he had earned a doctorate in microbiology from the prestigious St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. But there was no such program running at the hospital at that time. He also claimed to have gotten his PhD from the University of Tennessee Health Center. But he appears in no yearbooks from the university during that period. The school declined to verify his claims, citing a federal privacy law. Since college he had been a drug user and a big drinker, but during his residency was when his drug use started to escalate. He was frequently taking LSD, cocaine, and illegally getting his hands on prescription painkillers. His ex-girlfriend Megan initially thought that this was just something he did occasionally, But it was clearly not the case. After a full night of drug taking, drinking vodka and no sleep, Megan said he grabbed his scrubs and walked into work ready to talk to patients. She was horrified. His choice of drug was cocaine, although when he would come down after binges, he would rely on OxyContin, Xanax, and alcohol. Many said he would start his days off with a vodka and orange juice and a line of cocaine. One of his friends would later talk about just how out of control his drug use was, and several nurses said they saw him taking cocaine right before he went into surgery. But Dunch joked about it, calling them his neurostimulants, believing it made him better and more alert in theater. After he was reported, he was asked to take a drugs test, which he refused to do. He was subsequently sent to an impaired physician program. In a deposition, slurring and not really concentrating, Dunch pleaded the fifth over and over again when asked about using drugs whilst working with patients. Despite the complaints, refusal to participate in tests, and after completing less than 100 surgeries, whereas it is typical for a resident to perform closer to 1,000, he was still allowed to finish his residency. In 2011, he was headhunted to join the Minimally Invasive Spine Institute in North Dallas with a $600,000 advance. Not long after, he was given surgical rights at the Baylor Regional Medical Center in Plano on a $50,000 a month salary. The recommendation that landed him the job had read, "Chris is extremely bright and possibly the hardest working person I have ever met," adding he had an excellent work ethic. For hospitals, surgeons are worth millions in revenue, on average about $2.5 million per year, and it is not uncommon to get operating privileges at other hospitals, hence the reason Dunch was able to get a string of these across Dallas. Only a couple of months after he had finished his training, Dunch met another surgeon called Dr. Randall Kirby, a man that would play a key role in this story. Kirby said the first conversation he had with Dunch revolved around him telling him he was the best surgeon in Dallas and the only one a patient could trust. He said he wanted to clean the town up and was quite aggressive with his delivery. Kirby was taken aback with his level of arrogance, knowing how new he was to this game. Other doctors saw the same outbursts but put his cockiness down to the fact he was just a really talented surgeon and he knew it. Opinions soon changed, however, when the only surgery he actually performed at the Minimally Invasive Spine Institute resulted in him being asked to leave. After the surgery was done, he immediately went on a trip to Las Vegas to party, and left no one to look after his distressed patient. His drug use wasn't slowing down, and he would write many long emails to another ex-girlfriend and his surgical assistant Kimberly, saying some very unhinged things, likely due to intoxication. One email read in parts, in more emails he referenced his drug and alcohol abuse. These emails were full of swearing, threats, and rambling and abusive language. The emails themselves are too long to read in full, but they are interesting and present a small insight into his mind. So we have linked them in the description box if anyone wants to take a closer look. In December 2011, shortly before Kelly Martin approached him, Christopher had operated twice on a man called Ken Fennell. He was his first patient in North Texas. The surgery didn't help fix his back pain, as Dunn had operated in the wrong area, a mistake he admitted, but one he said he would correct with a second surgery. Ken, desperate to fix his pain, agreed. When Ken woke up the second time around, he described his legs as like a bonfire burning him. Something had gone wrong during the second surgery, but he had no idea what, and he left hospital relying heavily on a motorized wheelchair from that point on. Dunch's next patient was Lee Passmore, and he was actually an investigator in the Collin County Medical Examiner's office. He had undergone back surgery once before, but his pain had come back. Without missing a beat, Lee's pain specialist recommended Dr. Dunch. The surgery was booked right away. A vascular surgeon called Mark Hoyle assisted with the operation. Dr. Hoyle watched in horror as Dunch began to cut out a ligament around the spinal cord that should never have been touched. Right away Lee started bleeding so profusely Hoyle said the operating room was like a lake of Dunch not only left some hardware in Lee's spine, he also stripped the screw so it could not be moved. Unable to watch anymore, Dr. Hoyle said he blocked the incision area to try and stop Dunch from carrying on. "We need to talk about this," he said, locking eyes with Dunch. "That's dangerous. Even that attitude is dangerous. I've done 5,000 of these and I've never seen this done before." For the arrogant and careless surgeon, it was not enough to stop him. Hoyle said he left the operating room and vowed to never work with the surgeon ever again. Lee Passmore did survive the ordeal, but lives with chronic pain and has a lot of trouble walking and balancing. The next patient to have his life irreparably changed was Barry Morguloff. Spending his life unloading trucks, his back was now in pain all the time. The only recommendation he got was Dr. Dunch, but Barry wasn't sure. Nervous about getting surgery, and he spent hours poring over reviews about him and all his awards and accolades. Barry set up a meeting with the surgeon and clicked with him right away. He said he felt calm seeing how confident Dr. Dunge was. He said he was a very charming and disarming guy, a loving family man it seemed. Phenomenal, great guy, loved him, Barry said. In January 2012, Barry was wheeled into surgery. The vascular surgeon assisting Dunge was none other than Dr. Randall Kirby. Dr. Kirby said of the operation, in the spectrum of what a neurosurgeon does for a living, doing this procedure is probably the easiest thing that they do on a daily basis. Kirby watched as Dunge went right in without using the proper tools, grabbing at things that he shouldn't have been and haphazardly blundering around. Kirby argued with Dunge before changing tack and politely offering to take over the surgery. But Dunge insisted he knew what he was doing. Kirby left, but he was unable to shake this feeling that he had about Dunge and had had since the day he first met him. Barry woke up from the surgery in agony, a pain unlike anything he'd felt before. It would turn out that there were bone fragments that had been left in Barry's spinal canal. Another surgeon would later try and repair the damage, but Barry has to walk with a cane now, and his doctor said one day he will end up in a wheelchair. At one point, Barry was so depressed and sick that he contemplated taking his own life, believing it was the only way the mental and physical pain would end. Fortunately, his wife and children were able to pull him out of the dark place and he began some intensive therapy. Dunge's childhood friend and now roommate Jerry Summers then approached him to perform a surgery on his back too. He had a herniated disc. The pair would often go out partying together and Jerry even had access to Dunge's credit cards. To ask his good friend to do this simple surgery seemed like a given. The trust was already there and Dunge was often talking about how highly in demand he was. But for Jerry, the dream situation would quickly turn into a nightmare. In surgery, he damaged Jerry's vertebral artery and the bleeding just wasn't stopping. 2 liters of blood was soon lost. Dunge packed the area with so much anticoagulant that it squeezed Jerry's spine. When Jerry woke up, he said he couldn't feel anything. He had no sensation in either of his arms or legs and was now completely paralyzed. Would later require 24/7 round-the-clock care. Lying in the ICU, knowing that he was never going to recover, he turned to his girlfriend and said, "Kill me, I want to die." Dunge never once came to see his friend, see how he was, or even explain what had happened. In a depressed rage, Jerry told the nurses that Dunge had been taking cocaine the night before he performed the surgery. He later admitted he had just made this up. But knowing his friend and his drug usage, he felt it was fairly educated assumption. His claim was taken seriously and Dunge was ordered to take a drugs test. The test would never happen as Dunge claimed he got lost on his way there. He did pass a separate psychological evaluation and just 3 weeks later, he was allowed to start operating again, but was instructed to stick to minor procedures. But after this, we come back to Kelly Martin's case. She would be his next patient. After Kelly died, officials ordered Dunge to take another drug test. This time, he took it. The first screening came back as showing it had been diluted with water, and the second, a few days later, was clean. Some while later, Lee, still struggling to work, was allowed to resign from his job at the Collin County Medical Examiner's office. But before he left, a fax came through that stopped him in his tracks. There were 2 names at the top of the first page, Kelly Martin and Dr. Christopher Dunge. He sat and read what happened to her, shocked at what he was seeing. The cog started turning as he connected the dots between that and his own botched surgery. He went down a rabbit hole and found a few months that were not accounted for in Dunge's educational history. He said you don't get to walk away from 2 to 3 years of medical training in the middle of an internship or a residency. Get to take time off and be slotted directly in the position you left in with no questions asked. Maybe that's how they do it in Tennessee. But according to my training, that's not how they do it here. Then it all just started to unravel. Administrators at the hospital put together a comprehensive review of all of Dunge's cases and each time the same thing had happened. Patterns were showing and other surgeons were talking. Now someone was dead. This could not be ignored. After going through everything that had happened in that particular hospital alone, they determined he couldn't continue there. To the shock of the other surgeons and patients, the hospital did not fire him. Instead, they asked him to resign, remaining in good standing, with his last day being in April 2012. Through a letter, Baylor Plano said, "All areas of concern with regard to Christopher D. Dunge have been closed. As of this date, there have been no summary or administrative restrictions or suspension of Dunge's medical staff membership or clinical privileges during the time he has practiced at Baylor Regional Medical Center at Plano. The places that had asked him to leave chose to avoid the legalities of a potential wrongful termination." and bad press of firing such a highly respected doctor, and instead let him quietly resign and move on with no repercussions. And as he technically left of his own choice, this meant that at least 2 facilities did not have to report him to a database run by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. This database is supposed to log information about problem practitioners, warning potential employers about their histories. They also failed to report him to the Texas Medical Board. When some of his patients tried to sue him for malpractice, most of them found it virtually impossible to find attorneys willing to take on their cases. In 2003, Texas enacted tort reform which reduced the amount of damages plaintiffs could win, with the number of malpractice payouts per year dropping by more than half. In July 2012, Dunch moved right on to the Dallas Medical Center. The background check they briefly ran on him came back clean. In the same month he joined, Dunch operated on 63-year-old Floella Brown, a banker looking forward to retirement. About 30 minutes into the surgery, the bleeding was so bad that Dunch said he couldn't see her spine. "Why is it still bleeding?" he kept saying. After a few scary moments, it seemed Dunch had got it under control, but nurses in the room were concerned. Although Floella woke up and seemed fine, early the following morning she lost consciousness as pressure was building up inside her brain for reasons that no one could work out. She was in critical condition and it wasn't looking good. While Floella lay in the intensive care unit with doctors fighting to save her life, Dunch was set to go into another surgery with 71-year-old Mary Ford. Mary was very active and loved working out, but back pain was stopping her from living her life. The surgery was very simple, easily mastered by most first-year residents. Before the surgery started, nurses spotted a hole in Dunch's scrubs right at the back, showing he wasn't wearing underwear. One nurse, Kyle Kissinger, said he had seen the same hole for 3 straight days, and it was clear that Dunch wasn't even changing his scrubs between surgeries. As he stared into Dunch's eyes, he said he had pinpoint pupils and wasn't blinking. It was all very alarming. The surgery for Dunch was more of the same. The operating room staff questioned why he seemed to be drilling into random areas of her back carelessly and without paying any attention. Soon after the surgery on Mary started, Dunch turned to Kyle and said he wanted to perform a procedure on Floella called a craniotomy. This involves cutting a hole in the skull to relieve pressure on the brain. Kyle was shocked and said Dallas Medical Center did not perform these as they didn't have the proper equipment to be able to. Other people in the room were agreeing with what Kyle was saying, trying to talk him out of it. Unfortunately, he backed down. Floella was moved to another hospital, but she never regained consciousness, and her family withdrew her life support a few days later. A neurosurgeon was hired to review her case and death, and would later conclude that Dunch had both pierced and blocked her vertebral artery with a misplaced screw. He also found that he had misdiagnosed the source of her pain in the first place and was operating in totally the wrong area. This had triggered a stroke, which had ultimately claimed her life. Mary Ford woke up from the surgery, the same as the others before her, in total agony. She couldn't move her legs or feel her toes. Dr. Robert Henderson, another important person in this story, was called in to look at her case. He was an extremely talented Dallas spinal surgeon with 3 decades of experience. He pulled up her post-op x-rays and the first thing he said was, "Some kind of travesty occurred." Mary was pulled back into surgery the next day with Dr. Henderson operating. There were 3 holes in Mary's spinal column where Dunch had tried and failed to insert several screws. One screw had hit the nerves that control one leg and the bladder. Dr. Henderson then discovered that Dunch had amputated on one of her nerve roots, for reasons Henderson called inexplicable. The surgery had gone so badly and was so botched. Dr. Henderson wondered if Dunch was some sort of imposter, dressing up and pretending to be a surgeon. He could think of no other reason why this had gone so wrong. Mary Ford now relies on a wheelchair. She has never regained mobility in her legs. She said one of her biggest loves was sewing. She used to do it all the time, but as she can't pick up her foot, she can't do this anymore. "Pain is really my life," she said. Dr. Henderson was horrified and took his findings to the hospital administrators. And he and Dr. Kirby both started sharing stories. Dr. Kirby had operating privileges at over 60 hospitals across Texas, and wherever he went, someone at some point would come up to him with a story about Dr. Dunch. Thanks to the fuss the pair kicked up, hospital officials told Dunch he would no longer be able to operate at Dallas Medical Center. However, yet again, he wasn't fired or suspended. He was allowed to leave quietly. People were going in for the most simple, routine, and standard surgeries and procedures, and they were coming out worse than they went in, and in the case of Kelly Martin and Floella Brown, they weren't coming out at all. It had taken months and multiple catastrophic and fatal surgeries, but finally Dr. Dunch was reported to the state medical board. However, this was not the simple fix surgeons like Dr. Henderson and Dr. Kirby thought. It would take almost a whole year for the board to investigate. All the while Dunge was operating elsewhere. Things went quiet for a little while, until December 2012. Dr. Kirby was asked to assist with a woman called Jacqueline Troy. She had had neck surgery and was now battling a severe infection. Dr. Kirby found that the surgeon who had operated on her had cut her vocal cords and one of her arteries. "Is it a guy named Christopher Dunge?" he asked. He knew the answer already, and of course the answer was yes. Dunge was finally reported to the National Practitioner Databank. But even after the report was filed, Dr. Kirby found that another hospital had given him operating privileges. Although Dunge didn't realize this, Jeff Glidewell would be his last patient. Jeff, always an outdoors-loving man, had had a motorbike accident years before, and his back and neck had never been the same. He had come across Dunge in an advert that was showing the best neurosurgeons in the Dallas area. Despite everything going wrong for Dunge's patients, it seemed he was still the talk of the town. As a superstitious man, Jeff saw 3 black cats on the way into the hospital and said his gut told him to turn around. Reassured by his wife, they carried on for the surgery. Hours later, Dunge was nowhere to be found. 3 hours after the surgery was supposed to start, Dunge finally turned up in a cab, claiming he had a flat tire. His jeans were frayed, he was sweaty and disheveled, and Jeff said he didn't look at all ready for the surgery. His bad feeling grew, but he kissed his wife goodbye and went into the operating room. At this point, unbeknownst to Jeff, the state medical board had been investigating Dunge for about 10 months. During the surgery, Dunge thought that part of Jeff's neck muscle was a tumor and stopped operating on him halfway through. He cut into Jeff's vocal cords, punctured an artery, and cut a hole in his esophagus. Dunge used a sponge to stop the bleeding and stitched Jeff back up, with the sponge still inside him. Dunge came out and told Jeff's wife Robin he had found a tumor confirmed by a quick biopsy, and therefore he couldn't possibly carry on. But there was no tumor and there had been no biopsy. Robin went in to see Jeff in the recovery room. Jeff was so distressed he couldn't swallow and breathlessly mumbled, "Where's the doctor? I can't move my arm or my leg. Something's wrong. What did he do to me?" Dunge finally showed his face, and Jeff, now battling an infection as well, said, "I can't move my arms." Dunge replied, "Well, I don't know what to tell you about that," before strolling off. None other than Dr. Randall Kirby was called in to correct the damage, and at this point he was quite literally losing his mind. How did this keep happening, and when was it going to end? On a scale of difficulty, this was about a 2 out of 10 procedure. He said this was not an operation that was performed. This was attempted murder. It was like a crazed maniac procedure. Dr. Kirby went directly to the Texas Medical Board and Robin went to the police. The officer she spoke to said they didn't have the resources to file criminal charges against a doctor. She went back to Dr. Kirby, asking if she could contact the medical board too, and a statement was drafted. Jeff Glidewell would leave the hospital months later, partially paralyzed and with only one vocal cord. He has nerve damage in one arm and can only eat small bites of food at a time. But Dunge would again move elsewhere. In May 2013, Dr. Henderson and Dr. Kirby opened up their emails to find an invite to a Meet the Specialist dinner. University General Hospital was throwing an event to welcome a new neurosurgeon joining their team, Dr. Christopher Dunge. They simply couldn't believe it. This was Dunge's 3rd hospital in 18 months. Dr. Kirby said he picked up the phone right away and called the hospital to, in his words, raise holy hell. He then sent them a 6-page letter which read in part, "Let me be blunt, Christopher Dunge, Texas Medical Board license number N8183, is an impaired physician, a sociopath, and must be stopped from practicing medicine." In the letter, Kirby told the hospital they could either address it and do something about it, or he would be calling every media outlet in Texas. With so much talk in the medical community and between family members, the stories were traveling fast. An article was published about him online referring to him as Dr. Death and quoted Dr. Kirby and all of his findings. Dunge took to the comments section to threaten Dr. Kirby if he kept talking. But in this case, there was no such thing as bad publicity because finally in June 2013, Christopher Dunge was suspended and ordered to stop operating. Dunge was able to issue some sort of appeal through a lawyer and said he didn't have the time to use drugs or drink, even if he wanted to because he was too busy. He said he was a hard worker and he even threatened to sue Dr. Kirby for slander. He claimed he was at the center of a vast conspiracy to bilk money from the hospitals where he practiced. When asked why it had taken so long for the suspension to happen, the head of the medical board said at the time, "It's not uncommon for there to be complications in neurosurgery. None of us rush to judgment that's not fair, and in the long run it can come back to be incorrect. To suspend a physician's license, there has to be a pattern of patient injury, so that was ultimately what happened. But it took until June of 2013 to get that established, he added. For Drs. Henderson and Kirby, it wasn't good enough. Dr. Henderson said the word suspended implied he might be allowed back at some point, and they couldn't let that happen. Dr. Kirby, Dr. Henderson, and another doctor contacted the district attorney, arguing that Dunch was a criminal. They got a meeting, but nothing happened. In December 2013, almost 2 years since Kelly Martin had died, the medical board permanently revoked Dunch's license. Despite his huge salary, Dunch was now in dire straits financially. He had to file for bankruptcy, owing more than $1 million, and leave Texas, moving in with his parents in Colorado. He would come back and forth to see his 2 young sons, but it appeared the relationship with his girlfriend Wendy had fallen apart too. A month after moving, he was pulled over by police in the early morning hours. He was driving on the wrong side of the road with 2 flat tires. As soon as they spoke to him, the smell of alcohol was strong and empty bottles littered the car floor. Dunch was arrested for a DUI and ordered into rehab. In March 2014, police were called in again to a bank in Dallas, after people saw a man with blood on his hands and face, banging on the doors and trying to get in. It was Dunch. He was wearing his scrubs and was incoherent, saying something about his family being in danger. He was swiftly taken to a psychiatric hospital. After his father had sent him some money, he was caught in a Dallas Walmart, filling a cart with almost $1,000 of watches, sunglasses, computer equipment, and cologne. He bagged them up to hide them, before picking out some clothes and putting them on in the dressing room. He then headed right for the front door but was stopped by security and arrested for shoplifting. His life was out of control and the wheels were starting to come off. Later that year, Bila Plano was told a lawsuit had been lodged against them by Ken Fennell and Lee Passmore, swiftly followed by Maria Ford and Barry Mergeloff. Bila Plano described this as extremely frustrating and difficult, adding that a lot of what had been said about them was misleading, and that they never knowingly allowed one person to compromise the level of quality care they pride themselves on. Jeff Glidewell, still fighting to accept his life was now what it was, but still wanting justice, made a call to a judge with everything he knew about Dunch. This would finally help bring the case back to the district attorney's attention and get the ball moving. We now meet someone else vital in bringing this case to a conclusion. Michelle Shugart, the assistant district attorney. The case instantly piqued her interest, as in her 13 years with the Dallas DA's office, she had never prosecuted a doctor. In fact, from looking at other cases like this, it seemed that no one had ever prosecuted a surgeon for what they had done in the operating room. It would become a case of thirsts for many reasons. She began researching everything she could on Dunch, and it was staggering just how much was out there about him. She issued 800 subpoenas and spoke to over 100 people in person. In July 2015, 46-year-old Christopher Dunch was arrested on 5 aggravated assault charges, 1 count of injury to an elderly person, Maria Ford. He was also accused of maiming 3 patients and causing the deaths of at least 2. He was taken into custody and denied all the allegations. He was officially charged and pleaded not guilty. In Texas, the charge of injury to an elderly person carries a potential life sentence, but there were only 4 months left before the statute of limitations ran out. This was the big charge they were pushing to take to trial, as, for various reasons, if they could obtain a conviction for this, it would be worth more in terms of years than any of the other charges. One lawyer said it's not worth an attorney's time and energy to take on a malpractice case. The outcome, sadly, would just not be worth it. The prosecution knew this was a tough case, but their goal was to get a sentence long enough to ensure he would never be able to practice medicine again. To the relief of the prosecution, Dunch was criminally charged in the maiming of Mary Eford, and this was the charge that went to trial. Dunch opted not to testify in his own defense. Despite the fact they were only focused on Mary's case, they still had a huge amount of people that were willing to testify against him to prove his negligence in the years before he even met Mary. Doctors Randall and Henderson took to the stand, as did Jerry via a video link from his home. Mary herself also testified. The prosecution said it was obvious he had intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly harmed up 2 of his patients, although we know there were many more people affected. Jeff Cheney woke up from his operation to find out that Dunch had removed part of his spinal cord by mistake, paralyzing the entire right side of his body. Jackie Troy found herself unable to talk as Dunch had paralyzed her vocal cords. Philip Mayfield paralyzed from the neck down. Marshall Muse spiraled into addiction after relying on pain pills following his surgery. and Pam Trusty feels lucky to be alive. However, Dunch's legal team claimed that he was not a criminal, just a lousy surgeon and a lazy person. They said him committing malpractice was due to chaotic operating rooms in hospitals in Dallas. And as for the emails he wrote to his ex-girlfriend Kimberly saying he would become a killer, they said it was simply sarcasm taken badly. Even his lead attorney said, "You have people in walkers, you have people on crutches, you have people that could barely move. You had people that had lost loved ones. You had all sorts of things that had gone wrong. Before we even get to Mary, you can see that it's going downhill. I mean, it's going downhill fast. So why didn't he stop?" Michelle asked. Because of greed. Because he owed people a lot of money. He wanted to live the high life, and a neurosurgeon makes big bucks. Why didn't he stop? Because he had no conscience. He doesn't care what he has left in his wake. In court, Dunch was calm and collected. His lawyer later said he truly and honestly thought he was doing a good job, and this all seemed shocking to him. He said until the expert started speaking, it seemed he was clueless as to the damage he caused. The jury took just 4 hours to return their verdicts. In July 2016, he was found guilty of 1 count of intentionally or knowingly causing serious bodily harm to an elderly individual. Dunch's family begged for some mercy when it came to the sentencing. They described him as a bright little boy who had taken care of sick birds and loved dogs. They acknowledged his issues, but said everything he did came from a place of wanting to help people. His dad Don said, in February 2017, Christopher Dunch was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years. He filed an appeal in 2018, but his conviction was upheld. He's not eligible for parole until 2045 when he will be 74 years old. This case set a huge precedent. It is the first time in the United States that a physician has been convicted of criminal charges for actions in the course of their medical work. In June 2023, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a bill into law that would give the state's medical board additional ability to protect patients from potentially dangerous doctors. The bill, HB 1998, was introduced in response to an investigation that found at least 49 doctors were practicing in Texas, despite having their licenses revoked in other states. To think about how many people these doctors were treating is shocking. There was no record of these actions on the Texas Medical Board's physician profile pages, despite being required by law. The new law includes several provisions which will better enable the board to protect patients and boost transparency. These include some of the following. Lying on a medical license application will be a Class A misdemeanor. Doctors who have had their medical licenses revoked, restricted, or suspended in another state will not be allowed to practice in Texas. All doctors will be required to be fingerprinted as part of a criminal background check and be monitored monthly via the National Practitioner Data Bank. The 4 hospitals that employ Dunch have ongoing civil cases against them as well. Sadly, not reporting these things is not uncommon. In 2011, a staggering 47% of hospitals did not report their restrictions or revocations of doctors' clinical privileges, leaving the doors wide open for the lack of paper trail to be taken advantage of. Questions had to be answered, and accountability had to be taken. It highlighted the systemic problems within the healthcare field, all the way to the top. The hospital officials which allowed him to leave rather than firing him and having him investigated issued a statement which read, "Our primary concern, as always, is with patients. Out of respect for the patients and families involved, and the privileged nature of a number of details, we must continue to limit our comments. There is nothing more important to us than serving our community through high-quality, trusted healthcare. Trying to comprehend the amount of damage and destruction that Christopher Dunch has caused is impossible." Between May 2011 and June 2013, Dunch performed surgery on 38 people. 32 of them were left with life-changing injuries, in some cases completely paralyzed, and 2 had died. His case became quite a big part of mainstream media, with a hugely successful podcast being launched about it. And it was even made into a TV show on Peacock called Dr. Death. It was an all-star cast, with Joshua Jackson playing Dunch and Christian Slater playing Dr. Randall Kirby. And this brings us to the amazing doctors that helped put an end to his career. One has to wonder if it wasn't for the perseverance of Dr. Kirby and Dr. Henderson, how much longer would Dunch have continued? Tragically, a 3rd victim's life would be claimed when, in 2021, Jerry Summers, Dunch's patient and once dear friend, died from an infection connected to his botched surgery. We trust that when we need them, people in Christopher Dunch's position of authority, knowledge and power will look after us. They will care for us. They will make us better. We put our faith and trust in them, that they will turn things around even when the odds might seem stacked against us. We hope that we are in good and safe hands. The families that were affected by the crimes of Christopher Dunch, that trust will likely forever be broken. Kelly's husband Don Martin said, "My whole lifestyle has changed. Everything is different now. I look at life differently, totally differently. Life is too precious, too short. We can't take the little things for granted. We are just trying to make the best of each day." Greenbrier is a small town in Arkansas Faulkner County. It's the internationally known Riddles Elephant and Wildlife Sanctuary. Greenbrier is often regarded as Arkansas's safest city. Greenbrier is currently a delightful and secure neighborhood. However, not in the 1980s and 1990s. Then the community of Greenbrier grew out of a bit of a brothel. It was where the world met Pamela Faye Falcons. 32-year-old Pamela Faye Falcons was a mother of two and a working clerk at Crossroads Video Store in Greenbrier, Arkansas. The night of February 2nd, 1990 was chilly and wet. Pam was working at the Crossroads Video Store at the time. Her husband David Falcons was meant to pick her up from work. David arrived and saw that Pam wasn't there when he came soon before the 9 p.m. closing hour. An ashtray with a lit cigarette and a hot cup of coffee sat on the counter seemed unusual to David. The cash register was still ringing. Pam's pocketbook, keys and coat were all in the store, but she had vanished. David reported her missing. A search team was dispatched to find her immediately after getting David's statement. Officials and volunteers searched for the 32-year-old mother of two until lousy weather made the search difficult. The search resumed in the morning and continued throughout the afternoon. Then two of Pam's relatives discovered a terrible find 2 miles south of McGinty Town on Clinton Mountain Road. Within a flash of the moment, after the horrific discovery, her relatives wished to go and rewind the days with Pam. Yes, Pam's dead body was discovered at an old rubbish dump location. She had multiple cuts on her legs and had been battered with a blunt weapon around the head and shoulders, with the blow to the skull being the fatal injury, and a DNA sample was taken from her sperm. Faulkner County Sheriff's investigator Marty Montgomery, who went to school with Pam, was one of the initial investigators on the case. He also went on to serve as sheriff for 5 terms. Marty thought at least finding the inhumane animal could find some peace for Pam's kids and family. So he started to collect witnesses of the men who assaulted Pam. A young couple leaving the business just as the intruder entered it at 8:40 p.m. came the closest to becoming witnesses. The couple added that he was a tall, stocky Caucasian man in his 30s or 40s with a tattoo other distinctive feature on his left arm. Around the time of the kidnapping, someone eating at the Wagon Wheel restaurant next door to the video shop reported seeing a car there. A light blue Chevrolet with a white panel and a white camper shell was mentioned. Everyone within a 100-mile radius was looking for the vehicle, but it never showed up. Instead, they found that rape was allegedly committed at an abandoned mobile home on Heath Lane in Greenbrier. Montgomery said that they had received various intelligence reports from many sources. Alibis and polygraph testing cleared the persons who were brought in for interrogation. Other prospective witnesses were interrogated and physical evidence was analyzed. However, the probe soon came to a halt. According to Bob Blankenship, then sheriff of Faulkner County, the inquiry might take long unless investigators find a smoking gun. There have never been more actual words stated. Before DNA identified the culprit, Faulkner County elected 5 additional sheriffs. But only after 18 long years, with the flourishing DNA technologies, forensic genealogists could search ancestral databases for matches to DNA samples recovered at crime scenes. In October 2018, Faulkner County Sheriff Tim Riles announced at a news conference that they were able to use DNA genealogy with a 99% accuracy to discover the owner of the DNA acquired from Pam. Using unknown DNA, a family tree construction approach was utilized to identify Edward Keith Reniger. Investigators also retrieved DNA from the murderer's biological daughter, which revealed a 99% match. Our culprit has a history of sexually assaulting women, and was sentenced to 10 months in jail in 1994 for kidnapping a Cleburne County lady at knife point who managed to flee. He relocated to Utah, where he resided with his father after his release in May 1995. He, a former truck driver, passed away in 2002 from cancer. He has been aggressive toward his 2 ex-wives. According to his daughter, he was the subject of a restraining order. The murderer's daughter confirmed that he was living in Greenbrier when the Falcons were murdered. He'd been a frequent visitor to the video store, but her daughter didn't recognize him, and neither did her friends or family. According to Solomon Graves, Public Information Officer and Legislative Liaison for the Arkansas Department of Corrections, the intruder has a surgical scar on his left forearm, but it was not what the couple witnessed at the video shop. A Officials haven't closed the investigation yet, and they've been cautious with their language, referring to Reniger as the principal suspect in the case, rather than the murderer. They'd prefer more supporting evidence, such as a murder weapon or something Pam had to wound up in Reniger's belongings. Investigator Kent Hill wasn't able to remark on whether Reniger had an accomplice. Falcons was under 100 pounds and stood 5 feet tall. Reniger was 6 feet 4 inches, so he could have easily upmuscled her. But it doesn't rule out the possibility of a co-conspirator. Other concerns and perceptions persist. What had Reniger been up to throughout his years as a free man? Was Pam Falcons the only one who died? Or did Reniger get framed up? Is there anyone who knows how to fit all of the puzzle parts together? Reniger worked at Verco Manufacturing in Conway from 1988 to 1990 or 1991. And Sheriff Friles requested a public's aid in knowing more about him. After being released from prison, he went to welding school at the Spartan College of Aeronautics and Technology in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Investigators Kent Hill and Johnny Fawkes are waiting for anyone who may have known Reniger or have information regarding his personal life, or those he was affiliated with. But he seems to have no friends, and also even his ex and wives are not aware in depth of his past. Reniger is the primary suspect, but they don't have enough pieces of evidence to prove that he is the murderer. It's been 32 long years. There is not even a lead, and nobody had ever claimed they knew Reniger except his family, who are unaware of his darkest side. 69-year-old Gloria Hansel lived in Gary in 1994. She was a widow who lived alone at her Buchanan Street residence. Gloria was reliant on an in-home oxygen machine due to poor health. On June 17th of 1994, a family member visited Gloria. When the family member entered her home, they found Gloria's body. An electrical cord from a box fan was tied around her neck. An autopsy revealed that Gloria had also been assaulted. Investigators were then able to collect male DNA from her body. For years, Gloria's case went unsolved. During a new look in 2020, the FBI's Gang Response Investigative Team enlisted the help of the Indiana State Police Lowell Regional Laboratory in analyzing the suspect's DNA collected at the crime scene back in 1994. DNA testing led investigators to 60-year-old Gerald Lynn Smith. He lived close to Gloria when the crime was committed. A witness who came forward claimed that Smith visited Gloria on at least 2 occasions in the week leading up to her demise. The witness stated on one occasion Smith asked Gloria if he could cut her grass for money, but she declined his offer. On another occasion, Gloria told the witness that Smith made an unwanted advance towards her inside her house that made her uncomfortable when he tried to kiss her on the neck. When interviewed by investigators at Madisonville, Kentucky Rehabilitation Center, Smith denied any involvement. On September 30th of 2022, Smith was arrested and charged with taking Gloria's life. The FBI acknowledged the work of several law enforcement agencies, including the Gary Police Department, the Lake County Police Department Crime Scene Unit, and officials in Hopkins County, Kentucky. Smith has not yet entered a plea. He was 32 years old when the crime took place. 20-year-old Heather was the oldest daughter of South Carolina natives Terry and Debbie Elvis. Extremely close to her parents and younger sister, her father later described the relationship saying, "We've always been a tight-knit family, where everybody does for everyone else." Heather had an especially close relationship with her father, and she communicated with him daily via text message, always fiercely independent. When she graduated from St. James High School in 2011, and wanted to move out of the family home to share an apartment with her best friend Brianna Worrellman, Terry and Debbie supported the decision fully. At the age of 20, Heather was working hard as a waitress in a Scottish-themed restaurant named the Tilted Kilt in Myrtle Beach, and was studying cosmetology to achieve her lifelong dream of being a full-time beautician. Her younger sister Morgan said of her sister's life goals, as well as being known for her creativity and ambitious streak, Heather was very popular and well-liked around town because of her warm, carefree, and positive nature. When people talk about Heather, they smile because she was so full of personality, a friend of Heather said. Another spoke lovingly of her, saying, "I would describe Heather as outgoing, free-spirited, loving life. She always wanted to live to the fullest." By the early summer of 2013, Heather had been sharing an apartment with her best friend Brianna in Myrtle Beach for around a year, and her studies and life were going great. However, this would all change when a chance meeting in the Tilted Kilt would ignite a chain of events that would end in tragedy. On a warm day in June, Heather was working the day shift in the bustling restaurant. She took orders, bussed tables, and chatted with patrons as usual. While bringing trays back into the kitchen, Heather bumped into 37-year-old father of three, Sidney Moorer, a local maintenance man who ran a small business, fixing malfunctioning kitchen appliances in the Myrtle Beach area. The pair got chatting and Heather was instantly smitten. Tweeting from her account, Moonchild, Heather hinted at her new crush on the maintenance man, saying, "I got a taste for men who are older." By the end of July, she had posted a number of sexually suggestive messages on social media, directed it to the guy who builds things at my job. Heather also often pointed out Sidney Moore to her friends and coworkers, telling them, "That's the guy." Sidney loved the attention from Heather and started to turn up at the restaurant more often to talk to her. And the pair were often seen giggling together in the kitchen whenever Sidney was called in to work on the appliances. By July, the relationship may have gone from an innocent crush to something more serious when Heather put out 2 status updates a minute apart on Twitter, hinting at a possible affair between her and Sidney. "Baby did a bad thing," she wrote, "and I'm in way too deep, but watch me get deeper." Most of Heather's coworkers were, by now, well aware of the 20-year-old's affections for Sidney, and rumors began to circulate about the pair's affair. One of Heather's coworkers later said, "Heather was made fun of a lot, and she was called multiple names by girls we worked with. One day, 2 of the girls decided to call the tilted kilt and pretend to be Tammy, Sidney's wife." In August, the rumors were seemingly substantiated when Sidney started hanging around the tilted kilt on his days off, often bringing Heather coffee and bagels or waiting around the back of the restaurant in his vehicle for Heather to finish her shift. The pair also began talking more openly with friends about the love affair, with Sidney even going so far as telling acquaintances he was considering employing Heather as a full-time nanny for his children when he and his wife possibly moved to Florida in the future. Heather also mentioned to her friends that Sidney had asked her to be the nanny for his children, which they all felt was strange considering they appeared to be having a sexual relationship. Heather and Sidney communicated via mobile phone constantly and would often drive their cars to remote and isolated locations to meet each other for sex. It was a toxic roller coaster of emotions for Heather. Sidney often told her he was unhappy with his wife and was planning on leaving her, which he never did. Heather's friends warned her that the older married man was stringing her along. By mid-September of that year, all of the secrecy and sneaking around had started to take its toll on her, and on September the 21st, it is believed that Heather attempted to bring an end to the affair, or the relationship shut down somehow, due to Heather tweeting, "Once upon a time, an angel and a devil fell in love." It did not end well. Things became even more toxic when Sidney's wife, 34-year-old Tammy, finally discovered the relationship and confronted Heather over the phone. According to Heather's housemate Brianna, who was present at the time of the phone call, Tammy belittled Heather and said that Sidney had just used her as a booty call. The enraged woman then made her husband speak to Heather on the phone. Brianna would later tell investigators that Sidney had shouted down the phone at Heather, "You were nothing to me. You were just someone who spread your legs." They basically tore Heather apart as a human being and who she was as a person and made her feel horrible about herself, Brianna added. And Sidney Moore's marriage was seemingly an extremely abusive one, with criminal prosecutor Chris Helms later telling reporters, "Tammy Moore was definitely the more domineering part of that couple. She told Sidney where to work, when to work, what to do. If I could classify Sidney as anything in that relationship, it would be utterly submissive." Chris Helms also stated that Tammy had been livid at the betrayal and wasn't content to simply end the young girl's relationship with her husband. She wanted to destroy Heather's life. It was also around this time that Tammy began handcuffing her husband to the bed at night to stop him from leaving while she slept. She also changed the passcode on his phone to a combination only she knew and bullied him into getting her name tattooed across his lower stomach, just above the crotch. Sidney had agreed to all of these extreme demands in the hopes of saving his marriage and keeping his family together. According to Brianna, Tammy's attacks didn't end with that phone call, but instead escalated into a full-on campaign of hate. Tammy even going so far as to continuously call Heather's workplace in an attempt to get her fired. Tammy was relentless. She would call off of Sidney's phone. She was sending pictures of her and Sidney performing sexual acts, videos of the two of them together. Heather sent a text message to Sidney begging him to make his wife stop the harassment, writing, "I lost Albers today because they sent me home after she kept calling." Heartbroken and devastated by the way she had been treated by the man she had fallen in love with and terrified by the constant attacks and harassment from his wife, Heather desperately tried to get her life back on track. She even started attending church again with best friend Brianna. When Tammy sent yet more aggressive and threatening messages to Heather in the beginning of November, saying, she also said Heather, by now mentally and physically exhausted by the ordeal, simply replied, "I think you're a little obsessed with me. I'm nobody you need to worry about anymore. Heather couldn't understand why Tammy wouldn't just leave her alone. The relationship with Sydney was over and she just wanted to forget about it all. Towards the end of November, just over 2 weeks after the last threatening text messages from Tammy, things finally started to look more positive for Heather. Sydney and Tammy had taken their 3 children on a 3-week road trip across California with their newly purchased Ford F-150 truck. With the Moores gone, Heather felt like she could momentarily relax and breathe again. There would be a reprieve from Tammy's constant harassment. That wasn't the only positive thing happening in Heather's life at that time too. She had managed to secure her dream job in a beauty salon as a makeup artist and was scheduled to start work just before Christmas. She was absolutely elated and couldn't stop talking about it with all of her friends and family. Heather was also extremely worried about something that had potential to make the whole situation with the Moores much, much worse. At the beginning of November, Heather, as well as her co-workers at the Tilted Kilt, had started to notice the 20-year-old gaining a significant amount of weight in a very short amount of time. Heather was extremely concerned that she had become pregnant by Sydney. Worried, sick, and frightened, she decided to take a pregnancy test at the restaurant with the help of her manager, Jessica Cook, who later told police that Heather was terrified of Tammy Mora. The pregnancy test came back as an error, however, and Heather remained unsure if she was carrying Sydney's baby or not. Heather's best friend later said, Heather had taken a pregnancy test while at work. I want to say it was at the beginning of November, and she at that time wasn't sleeping with anyone else other than Sydney. Despite all of her worries, by the winter of 2013, Heather, ever the optimist, decided it was finally time to move on with her life and start again. She hoped to find a new relationship, a happier and healthier one, and so she agreed to go on a first date with a man she had only been talking to for a short while, but who she had a really good feeling about, Steve Scaraldi. On the evening of December 17th, Heather and Steve met at around 10 p.m. and decided to drive around Myrtle Beach to check out the local Christmas illuminations in town. A little while later, they decided to head to a nearby parking lot where Steve taught Heather how to drive his manual vehicle. Heather excitedly sent a text message to her father and Brianna with a smiling photograph saying, "Just learned to drive stick. I'm a pro." After, Steve would later say that the pair had agreed to meet again for a second date. And then he dropped Heather off at her apartment in Carolina Forest at around 1:15 a.m. At around 1:45 a.m., Brianna, Heather's best friend, received a worrying phone call from Heather. She was hysterically crying and she said, "Sydney called me. My heart dropped because I was like, I thought we were past this." I said, "Why'd you answer?" And she said, "Because it wasn't his number." She told me that he said he had left his wife and that he was sorry and that he wanted to see her and be with her. And I got angry and said, "Don't do it. You're finally moving on with your life. You're happy again. You're yourself again. Why don't you sleep? Sleep on this and we'll talk about it first thing in the morning." And with that, the friends said their goodbyes. The following day, on the 19th of December, local police were dispatched to investigate a suspected abandoned vehicle, a green Dodge Intrepid, parked haphazardly on an isolated and remote riverside area named Peachtree Landing, approximately 8 miles away from Myrtle Beach and on the Waccamaw River. The stretch of riverfront was used as a landing area for small boats and was located at the bottom of a long and lonely stretch of road that rarely saw traffic. The car was locked, but police ran the vehicle's number plate through their registration system and came back with the name of the owner. The green Dodge Intrepid was registered to Terry Elvis, Heather's father. Terry Elvis was relaxing at home and watching television on the living room sofa when police officers knocked on his door to notify him about the discovery of the Dodge Intrepid. Confused and not being able to contact his daughter on her phone, he agreed to accompany the officers to Peachtree Landing to find out what was going on. When he spotted Heather's car parked unusually in the isolated area, he was shocked, but not initially concerned. He unlocked the vehicle with a spare key he had, allowed the officers to search it. He recalled, "I thought the car might have been stolen because of the way it was parked. Maybe somebody took it and left it there," he said. "It didn't really hit me, where's Heather?" Until the officers started looking through things. When the police couldn't locate Heather's purse, keys, or cell phone within the Dodge Intrepid, her father began to worry. He tried calling her again on her mobile phone, which appeared to be switched off, and then attempted to locate her at the Tilted Kilt, but was told by staff that she wasn't there and wasn't scheduled to work until the next day. Terry instantly knew that something was wrong. "This is totally out of the ordinary," he said. "Heather's never done anything like this before. Something's wrong." The Horry Police Department didn't think Peachtree Landing and the vehicle were crime scenes initially, as there was no broken glass, no signs of a struggle, and no blood in the area. However, they did open a missing persons case immediately, and officers and volunteers began searching the areas around Peachtree Landing, while divers combed the river. Human remains were discovered in the proximity of the boat landing. However, analysis later showed that these bones belonged to a male. With no physical evidence to go on, detectives began tracing Heather's movements on the 17th and 18th of December. Steve Scaroldi, the man who Heather had met on the night she was last seen, was brought in for questioning, but quickly cleared of all suspicion and released, to the shock of Heather's family and friends, who were putting out heartfelt and emotional pleas for information, as well as rewards. In the immediate aftermath of Heather's disappearance, Tammy Mora immediately jumped on social media to continue her hate campaign, publishing on Facebook a long diatribe that began, "While Sydney cheated on me in the months of September-October with a psycho whore who has since went missing." On December 20th, after being tipped off about the volatile love affair between Sydney and Heather by Heather's roommate Brianna, as well as a number of employees at the Tilted Kilt, police detectives brought Sydney in for questioning. Sydney was evasive and standoffish from the onset of the interviews. Sydney denied being anywhere near Peachtree Landing on the night of the 17th or the morning of the 18th. He insisted he hadn't had any kind of contact with Heather at all, and strangely, insisted he was driving around in his truck with his wife Tammy at the time to have sexual relations in public, which the pair had recorded on their phones. The experienced detectives felt that he was lying. They just needed the proof. When they began to examine Heather's call history and phone records, they got their first real breaks in the case and began piecing together her last known movements and how Sydney featured in those. On the morning of the 18th, just as Brianna had described, Heather had received a telephone call from a number she didn't recognize. She didn't recognize the number because it was placed from a public payphone. That telephone call lasted approximately 5 minutes, and Heather had frantically attempted to call the number back numerous times, starting from 1:35 in the morning. Heather dials the payphone back 9 times. The only reason she could possibly be calling that phone 9 times, that phone she's never heard of before, is to get the other person that just talked back on the line, an investigator would later say. Using Heather's phone records, the investigators traced the number to a phone booth located outside a gas station in Myrtle Beach. Security cameras picked up the images of someone using the payphone at the exact time the number called Heather's cell phone. When asked if he was the person who had called her, Sydney at first denied it. Tammy Mora was also taken in for questioning, where she discussed her marriage and denied being involved in Heather's disappearance. Following their suspicions, detectives decided to check all available local surveillance cameras and quickly came upon further highly incriminating evidence. A short time before making the telephone call, Sydney was captured again on surveillance cameras, purchasing a pregnancy test from a local Walmart. When asked if the pregnancy test was for Heather, he denied it and said it was for his wife. Even more damning evidence to come to light was video footage taken from cameras alongside the isolated stretch of road leading to Peachtree Landing. A dark Ford F-150 truck matching Sydney's had been captured heading towards the place Heather's car was discovered at 3:36 a.m., and then again recorded leaving the area at 3:46 a.m. Experts later testified that the truck was a 100% identical match to Sydney's. Sydney was the last person to speak to Heather, and he was, investigators believed, the last person to see her in Peachtree Landing. Using her phone data, investigators were also able to create a timeline of her phone's last known recorded movements. 2:30 a.m. Heather's phone again calls the phone booth that Sydney had called her from but receives no answer. Her phone then heads in the direction of Longbeard's Bar and Grill in Carolina Forest, near to her apartment, where it remains for around 15 minutes to a location named Augusta Plantation Drive. Heather's phone then returns to Longbeard's Bar and Grill, where it remains for a further 15 minutes. A call is made to Sydney's phone but goes unanswered. Her phone returns to her apartment, where it stays for 5 minutes. 3:25 a.m. Another call is made to Sydney's phone, which is answered and results in a 4-minute-long conversation. At 3:37 a.m., Heather's phone makes its way to Peachtree Landing, and 1 minute later 3 attempts are made to call Sydney's phone. All calls go unanswered. 3:41 a.m., another unsuccessful attempt is made from Heather's phone to reach Sydney's. 3:42 a.m. Heather's phone is apparently switched off. The location data coinciding with the surveillance images captured of Sydney's truck heading towards Peachtree Landing were extremely incriminating. Even more incriminating evidence came to light after investigators obtained a search warrant for the Moorers' home. The Moorers had suspiciously disposed of their home surveillance system on the 20th of December and installed a new one on the 21st. Investigators, unable to get their hands on the old system, confiscated the newer system and received video footage of both Sydney and Tammy Mora thoroughly scrubbing the passenger side of the truck and then burning the rags they had used to clean the vehicle on the same day they had installed the new home surveillance cameras. Finally, after several months, in February 2014, the police were able to announce a break in the case. A break that everyone had been waiting for. And it came as little surprise to many people that Sydney and Tammy Mora had been placed under arrest in connection with the disappearance of Heather Elvis. They were soon charged with kidnap, and despite there being nobody, they were charged with murder as well. They needed to find Heather, but the couple were saying nothing. As the Moras sat in custody, the police continued to build their case. Despite everything they were confident they had, they just didn't have enough to follow through with the murder charge against the pair. Tammy and Sydney no longer faced charges of murder in Heather's case, but the kidnap charges remained. Debbie said it was very disappointing that the murder charges had been dropped, but she also felt a little relieved that she would not have to sit through a murder trial and listen to everything they thought could have happened to her daughter play out. Heather's family also hoped that this might encourage people to come forward and talk. As the murder charges had now been dropped, the couple were able to post bail and go home as they awaited further developments and the pending trial for kidnap. Following their release and in spite of a gag order, the pair took to social media to protest their innocence, claim they had been framed, and Sydney Mora even gave an emotional televised interview. Sydney's media appearances and failure to comply with the gag order would eventually land him in hot water. When he was jailed for 5 months for being in contempt and violating the Tammy publicly stated, "I feel like this town's going to crucify me because of all the lies that's happened." Months became years, and it was now 2017. Sydney Mora was found guilty of obstruction of justice and sentenced to 10 years in prison. After this, it was now time for Sydney and Tammy to go on trial for the kidnap of Heather Elvis. And the media were out in force to report on what was now a highly publicized case with a lot of interest. It had now been 6 years since anyone last saw Heather, and after many witness testimonies, all the evidence and hours of court proceedings taking us to 2019, it was time for the verdict. Justice finally prevailed when Tammy and Sydney Mora were both found guilty of the kidnap of Heather Elvis and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Sydney continued to insist he was innocent, telling the court that he couldn't give Heather's family closure. "If I could give them closure, I would. I have children of my own, I get it. There's just nothing I can give." As of the writing of this episode, Heather's body has never been found. In an effort to ensure that people will always remember Heather and draw attention to her case and other missing people, the Elvis family spends every June 30th, Heather's birthday, taping up missing persons flyers around town. They remain hopeful that at some point someone will talk, and maybe the answers about where Heather is will finally come to light. Debbie said persistence is key, and she would never give up her search for answers, not just for her own daughter, but for other missing people too. She says she knows the pain all too well and wants to channel her energy into making sure those in her position don't ever feel alone. The heartbreak of not knowing where Heather is best summed up by Debbie. As a mother, that child that was created in you, that you carried in your arms and put band-aids on, you just ache to hold your child again, and you think about what you could have done different, what you could have said that would have changed anything. But for our family and any other family that has a missing member, this is horrible, not knowing, not being able to take care of your child in any capacity whatsoever. They call it closure. I hate that word, but that's really what it is. Heather's heartbroken father, Terry, he continues to hope that one day she will be found. He said, "I hold out hope that I'll turn around one day at the front door and she'll walk in. Do I really think that'll happen? Deep down, no I don't, but I'll never give up." 42-year-old Shalia Jones lived in Phoenix, Arizona in 2005. She was a U.S. Air Force veteran. Shalia was known to her friends as Stevie. One of her close friends was Danita Green. Danita visited Shalia's Phoenix town home at 19th and Glendale Avenues just days after Christmas in 2005. When she entered the home, she noticed it looked like somebody was bent over on the couch, reaching under the couch for something. The person didn't move. It was hard for Danita to see because there were no lights on in the home. When she got closer, she could tell it was Shalia by her hands, which were bound behind her back. When Danita realized that Shalia was not alive anymore, she called 911. Investigators found that both Shalia's safes were emptied out and all of her drawers were pulled out. They believed that the crime likely started out as a burglary before things then escalated. Danita had this to say about her friend. "You could hear her smile when she talked to you. She had a heart of gold. She was a beautiful person." Recently, investigators decided to take another look at the cold case, and they were able to collect DNA belonging to the suspect from items that were at the crime scene. In 2022, that led investigators to a man named Latoya Klinkskill. He was arrested in October of 2022. Clinkscale was then extradited back to Phoenix from a prison in Wasco, California, where he was serving time for another crime. Danita said she was not expecting to get the call saying someone had been arrested in her friend's case. When shown a picture of Clinkscale, Danita said that she had never seen him before and believes the crime was random. He looks like somebody that if he ever approached her that he was down and out on his luck or whatever, she wouldn't hesitate to assist, says Danita.